Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're tackling a subject today that I think is uh, quietly occupying the back of everyone's mind.
It really is.
You see the headlines, you see the social media transformations, you definitely hear the chatter at dinner parties. We're talking about the GLP-1 revolution drugs like Wegovy and Ozempic. But I want to make a hard pivot right at the start. We are not here to talk about celebrity weight loss secrets, and we certainly aren't here to discuss the pharmaceutical stock market.
Oh.
We are here to talk about something much more grounded, something that affects the daily rhythm of every single household, the grocery store.
It's a fascinating and I think a much needed shift in focus.
Yeah.
Usually when we analyze these medications, the conversation is completely dominated by the biological endpoint.
Right, the numbers.
Exactly. We talk about pounds lost, appetite suppressed, blood sugar lowered. But there has always been this missing piece of the puzzle, a sort of black box of behavioral economics.
Oh, the black box. I like that.
Because we know, objectively, that people eat less when they're on these drugs. That's the primary mechanism. But the question that has been nagging at researchers, and frankly at anyone paying attention to the food industry is, do they eat better?
That is the million-dollar question. Does the biology actually change the economy of our household? Do we just buy less of the same junk? Or does the cart itself undergo a fundamental makeover?
And up until now, we've largely been relying on anecdotes to answer this.
Oh, absolutely. You hear stories of people saying, I just walked past the chip aisle and didn't feel anything, or I suddenly have a craving for strawberries instead of chocolate.
Right. And as much as we love a good story, anecdotes aren't data.
And if we know anything about human nature, it's that we aren't always the most reliable narrators of our own diets.
That's the classic problem in nutritional science, often referred to as recall bias. If you ask someone what they ate last Tuesday, they'll likely remember the grilled chicken and the salad. But they might conveniently or genuinely forget the handful of cookies they grabbed from the break room or the second helping of pasta. We tend to, edit our own memories to fit our aspirations.
I think we all do that.
But today, we are unpacking a brand new study published in the JAMA Network Open. This was published in January 2026, so it's fresh data that bypasses that problem entirely.
This is what got me so excited about this particular deep dive. We finally have hard data. We aren't asking people what they ate. We're looking at the receipts.
Precisely. This study, led by researchers at the Steno Diabetes Center Copenhagen, utilizes what's called the SEMAL cohort data. They tracked thousands of supermarket receipts to see if starting a GLP-1 therapy actually shifts what ends up on the conveyor belt.
And the results.
Well, they paint a very specific, and I would say somewhat surprising, picture of how biology influences consumerism.
So our mission today is to unpack this study from top to bottom. We're going to look at how they tracked this real-world purchase habit, what specific nutritional shifts occurred, and there's a fascinating surprise regarding protein.
A really interesting one.
And we're going to talk about this modest change paradox. We need to understand why these tiny numbers on a receipt might actually translate to massive changes for public health.
It's a perfect example of how granular data can reveal macro trends. We're going to see how users seemingly swapped, the middle aisles of the grocery store for the perimeter, and what that might mean for the future of the food industry.
Okay, let's dive right into the architecture of this study, because I think the methodology is just as cool as the findings. As we mentioned, they moved beyond the survey. They went straight to the truth serum, which is the receipt.
It really is a truth serum. You can convince yourself you didn't buy that second bag of candy, but the barcode scanner, it creates an irrefutable record.
No arguing with the scanner.
No. So this study utilized the Danish SMAL cohort, which stands for Health, Food, Purchases, and Lifestyle. It's this massive ongoing project where participants voluntarily use a smartphone app to photograph and upload their grocery receipts.
That is a significant level of dedication. I can barely remember to keep my receipts for tax season, let alone scanning every single liter of milk and bag of carrots for science.
It's a heavy lift for participants, for sure, and that's a point we'll circle back to when we discuss the limitations.
Right.
But for the researchers, it's a goldmine. For this specific analysis, they looked at a total pool of over 13,000 participants. From that huge group, they narrowed it down to a very specific sample to ensure accuracy.
So who made the cut?
They focused on 1,177 adults with a median age of about 53.
And they had to split them into groups, right? Because just looking at people on the drug doesn't tell you much if you don't know what everyone else is doing.
Correct. You need a control. So they identified 293 people who started GLP-1 therapy, specifically liraglutide or semaglutide, between 2019 and 2022.
And the others?
Then they matched them against 884 controls. These were non-users who were matched perfectly by age, sex, and income.
That matching process feels crucial.
It's everything. It helps rule out other confounding factors. If you just looked at wealthy people versus lower income people, your data would be skewed by what they can afford, right?
Of course.
By matching income, they leveled the playing field, isolating the drug as the primary variable.
And the timeline here is significant, too. They didn't just take a snapshot of 1 week or 1 month.
No, this was a longitudinal view, which is the gold standard for this kind of research. They analyzed purchases for 1 full year before the patient started the drug.
So you get the baseline.
You get the baseline. You can see the person's normal habits, and then they track them for 1 full year after. So you can watch how those habits evolve in real time after the biology changes.
A full 2-year window for each person.
Yes. And in total, they analyzed over 800,000 purchases before initiation and over 1.1 million purchases after.
That is a staggering amount of data. 1.1 million data points of yogurt, bread, chips, and vegetables. It really moves us away from that, I think I ate healthier narrative to here is exactly what I bought.
And it allows us to quantify this grocery cart effect with a level of precision we just haven't seen before.
Okay, let's get to the good stuff, the findings. What actually changed on the shelf? I have to admit, when I first looked at the abstract, my initial reaction was, is that it? The changes seemed kind of small.
That is a very common first reaction to this data, but it's also where the nuance lies. The headline finding is definitely a shift. It wasn't an overnight revolution where people threw out all their processed food and only bought organic kale.
Right, no dramatic purge.
No, but it was a statistically significant move toward higher quality nutrition.
Let's break down the less list first. What were people buying less of?
First and foremost, energy density. This is a measure of how many calories are packed into a specific weight of food. The purchases dropped by 2.1 kilocalories per 100 grams.
Okay, let's unpack that. 2.1 calories. That sounds like a rounding error. I mean, if I take a bite of an apple, that's probably 2 calories right there.
Right.
What does that matter?
It matters because of the scale and the consistency. We're talking about 2.1 calories per 100 grams across the entire diet.
Yeah.
So think of it this way. If you have a bucket of grapes and a bucket of raisins, the raisins have a huge energy density. Lots of sugar and calories packed into a small space. The grapes have low density because of all the water.
Got it.
A drop in energy density means the overall composition of the cart is becoming lighter. It's containing more water and fiber volume relative to calories. When you aggregate that over a year of shopping, tens of thousands of calories, that slight reduction indicates a systemic move away from these calorie bombs.
So it's not about eating one less grape. It's about the average consistency of everything you buy being slightly less fattening.
Exactly. And that trend continues with sugar. They saw a clear reduction of 0.6 grams of sugar per 100 grams of food.
Again, sounds small.
It does. Just a pinch. But think about the sheer amount of sugar that's hidden in processed foods. To see a consistent drop across the board means people are leaving the high sugar items on the shelf. They're filtering out the hidden sugars and sauces, breads, and snacks.
And the data also showed carbohydrates dropped by about 0.5 grams per 100 grams, and saturated fat saw a slight decrease of 0.1 grams.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, the bad stuff, or the stuff we try to limit, is trending down.
Yes, but here's the hook, and this is what I found most fascinating. While everything else went down, calories, sugar, carbs, fat, one specific nutrient went up.
Protein.
Protein, it increased from 6.6 grams to 6.9 grams per 100 grams.
This feels like a really important distinction. Because if the drug just made you nauseous, or if it just made you hate food, you would expect everything to drop, right?
Right, a general malaise towards all food.
You just buy less of everything across the board. Yeah. But seeing protein go up suggests a choice is being made.
It suggests a qualitative shift in prioritization. This is what separates these drugs from, say, simple starvation or just willpower-based dieting. The patients aren't just eating less, they are prioritizing nutrient density. Whether it's conscious or unconscious, the cart is shifting toward the building blocks of the body protein while cutting out the empty energy of sugar and fat.
Yeah.
It actually aligns with the protein leverage hypothesis, which suggests our bodies have this specific drive for protein intake, and once that need is met, hunger signals dissipate.
So the idea is if the drug quiets the noise for sugar, the drive for protein becomes the dominant signal.
That's the theory. It's a very compelling one.
That is incredible. It's
Yeah.
almost like the body knows what it needs to preserve muscle while shedding weight, and the shopping habits are reflecting that without the person even trying.
It's entirely possible. And to get a better sense of what those actual foods are, the researchers use the NOVA classification system.
Right, the NOVA system. We hear this a lot lately in nutritional circles. Can you give us a detailed refresher on what that actually measures?
Sure. The NOVA system classifies food not by its nutrients, but by how much it has been processed. It breaks food down into 4 groups.
Okay.
Group 1 is unprocessed or minimally processed foods. Think fresh fruit, raw meat, milk, eggs, plain yogurt, stuff your great-grandmother would recognize as food.
And the other end of the spectrum.
Group 4 is ultra-processed foods. These are industrial formulations. These are foods made from substances derived from foods with additives you wouldn't find in a home kitchen. We're talking about high fructose corn syrup, hydrogenated oils, flavor enhancers, emulsifiers.
So soft drinks, packaged snacks, mass-produced bread, pre-made frozen meals.
Exactly. The stuff that usually ends up in the cart when we are stressed, tired, or just looking for convenience.
So what did the data say about these NOVA groups?
The shift was perfectly consistent with the nutrient data. Ultra-processed food purchases dropped by 1.2 percentage points. Conversely, unprocessed foods, the whole foods in Group 1, rose by 0.9 percentage points.
So practically speaking, the users were swapping the middle aisles of the grocery store, the boxed stuff, for the perimeter, where the produce and fresh meats usually are.
That is the visualization. And this is significant because ultra-processed foods are engineered to be hyper-palatable. They are designed to make you overeat. They bypass your natural satiety signals.
That's their whole business model.
It is. So the fact that this drug helps people navigate away from those specific products and toward whole foods is a massive win for the behavioral mechanism of the drug. It suggests the drug is breaking the addictive cycle of these engineered foods.
It really challenges the idea that these drugs are the easy way out. It seems like they're actually enabling the hard work of dietary change that so many people struggle with.
I would frame it a little differently. They aren't doing the work for you, but they are removing the biological barrier that prevents the work from sticking. They quiet the noise so you can actually hear the signal of, I need protein, not sugar.
I love that framing. But we need to contextualize these numbers. We keep saying small shift, modest numbers. And I could hear the listener thinking, okay, 0.9% more unprocessed food, that's like 1 extra broccoli floree a month.
It is easy to dismiss, and that's why the control group contrast becomes so essential. You cannot look at these numbers in a vacuum. You have to look at them compared to what happens if you don't take the drug.
The drift effect.
Yes. The study matched the drug users against that control group we mentioned. And here's the kicker. Over that same 2-year period, the control group didn't just stay the same. They actually trended in the opposite direction.
Oh, wow. So the normal state of affairs was getting worse.
Exactly. The control group stats showed they bought slightly more calories, an increase of 1.6 kilocalories per 100 grams, and more sugar, about 0.2 grams more per 100 grams.
So without the intervention, the natural tendency, at least in this cohort, was for the grocery cart to slowly degrade in quality. More sugar, more calories.
That's the pattern of the modern food environment. It's a current that pushes us constantly toward more energy-dense processed foods. It takes active effort to swim against it.
So when you see the GLP-1 group dropping calories by 2.1,
you have to add that to the fact that they avoided the increase of 1.6 seen in the control group. The real delta is closer to 3.7.
the gap is widening. It's not just about the drop, it's about the divergence from the norm.
Precisely. The true impact of the drug is the prevention of that upward trend. It broke the pattern of business as usual. If you visualize 2 lines on a graph, the control line is slowly creeping up toward less healthy, and the GLP-1 line is dipping down toward more healthy. The distance between those 2 lines is the real measure of the drug's success.
That makes those modest numbers feel a lot more powerful. It's the difference between drifting out to sea and slowly swimming back to shore.
And that leads us directly to the concept of accumulation, which the authors of the study discuss. In public health, small numbers are king.
Let's unpack that. The so what factor. Why should we care about a 2% shift?
Think about it this way. If one person cuts their sugar intake by 1% for a week, it doesn't matter, it's meaningless. But if 1 million people cut their sugar intake by 1% for 10 years...
then you're talking about tons of sugar.
You are talking about tons of sugar removed from the food supply. You're talking about a massive cumulative reduction in metabolic strain on a population level.
It's the compound interest of nutrition.
Exactly. Given how rapidly these drugs are being prescribed, we're seeing exponential growth in uptake globally. A 2% shift in caloric density across a whole population creates a massive cumulative effect on public health outcomes. We might see shifts in diabetes rates, cardiovascular health, and obesity that are driven by these micro decisions in the grocery aisle.
It also speaks to that behavioral mechanism we touched on. The drug doesn't physically handcuff you from buying the donuts. You're walking through the store, you have your wallet, you have free will, but the decision-making process is altered.
It suggests that the food noise, that constant mental chatter about what to eat next, the cravings, the impulse, is dampened. The drug seems to alter the reward feedback loop in the brain. If the anticipation of that sugar rush isn't there, or if the satisfaction from the ultra-processed food is muted, the consumer simply doesn't put it in the cart.
It becomes a rational economic decision rather than an emotional compulsion.
That's a great way to put it.
Speaking of economic decisions, we have to talk about the spending drop. The numbers in the study were pretty stark regarding the budget.
They were. The pre-drug spending for the group was around 52,523 Danish krone annually. After initiating the drug, that dropped to 35,051 Danish krone.
That is a huge drop. That's roughly a 33% reduction in grocery spending.
It's enormous. Now, we have to be careful here. The researchers emphasize the nutritional quality per 100 grams, but the drop in total spending validates the appetite suppression aspect. They are simply buying less volume of food.
Which makes sense. If you're eating smaller portions, you aren't buying the family pack of lasagna anymore. You're buying the single serve, or you're just buying fewer ingredients to cook with.
It creates an interesting economic dynamic, though. The patient is spending money on the medication, obviously, which can be significant depending on insurance and location.
Of course.
But they are recouping a significant portion of that cost through reduced grocery bills. It's a literal transfer of wealth from the food industry to the pharmaceutical industry, mediated by the grocery cart.
That is a fascinating way to look at it. The grocery cart effect isn't just biological, it's financial. It changes the household budget structure.
It really does.
But before we get too carried away declaring this the end of unhealthy eating, we need to put our critical lens on. No study is perfect, and even the truth serum of receipts has its blind spots.
Absolutely. Transparency is key in science. We have to look at who these people are. The study used the Smello cohort. These are people who voluntarily downloaded an app and took the time to scan their receipts for science.
The self-selection bias.
Right. Who does that? Probably not someone who is completely disinterested in their health. These participants might already be more health conscious, more tech savvy, or more organized than the average person.
They might be more likely to try to eat healthy when they start a new medication, just because they're the kind of people who track data in the first place.
Exactly. So the results might be slightly cleaner or more optimistic than what we'd see in the general population who might just take the shot and not think twice about their shopping.
That makes sense.
It's a possibility. Another major limitation is the weight loss confound. The study utilized registry data for prescriptions and receipts, but they didn't have access to the patient's BMI or their weight logs.
So we don't know if they actually lost weight.
We can infer it based on the well-documented efficacy of these drugs generally, but we can't correlate the specific grocery changes to specific weight loss outcomes in this particular data set.
And more importantly,
we don't know if they are buying better foods solely because of the molecule in the drug or because they are mentally committed to a weight loss journey.
right, when you get a prescription for a serious drug like this, your doctor usually gives you a talk. You need to change your lifestyle, eat better, move more. So the patient leaves the office motivated. Is it the drug working, or is it that motivation?
The New Start effect. The authors acknowledge this. The observed changes may partly reflect that conscious effort to maximize the treatment. However, the fact that the changes persisted over a full year suggests it's more than just a burst of initial motivation.
That's a good point. Willpower usually cracks by February if you start in January. These receipts held steady for 12 months.
Which points more towards a sustainable biological change. Another point of transparency, the financial disclosures. The authors did receive grants from the Novo Nordisk Foundation.
The makers of the drugs.
Yes. Now, it's important to note that the Novo Nordisk Foundation is a separate entity from the pharmaceutical company, and the study used objective registry data housed at Statistics Denmark. It wasn't like the company was handpicking the receipts or influencing the analysis directly.
Okay.
But in the interest of full disclosure, that funding source is there and should be part of the context.
Always good to keep in mind. And finally, item matching. How accurate is the categorization of all these foods?
Well, it's a massive automated task. Categorizing 1.1 million items isn't done by hand, so there is potential for misclassification. Maybe a specific brand of granola bar gets coded as unprocessed when it should be ultra-processed because of a database error or a vague description on the receipt.
So some noise in the data.
Some noise. However, as the authors note, this error would likely apply to both the GLP-1 group and the control group equally. It shouldn't create a systematic bias that favors the drug.
So the trend lines hold up even if a few granola bars were mislabeled.
Exactly. The signal is strong enough to survive the noise.
So where does this leave us? We've looked at the architecture, the findings, the controls, and the limitations. When you zoom out, what is the core takeaway here?
The core takeaway is that these drugs appear to assist in a quality over quantity shift. It's not just about shutting down the appetite, it's about refining it. We see less sugar, less ultra-processed food, and significantly more protein.
It validates the idea that biology drives behavior. If you fix the hormonal signaling, the shopping list fixes itself, or at least starts to head in the right direction.
It turns the grocery store from a minefield into a manageable landscape. That drift toward unhealthy food that we saw in the control group is halted. The drug acts as a physiological tool that aligns the body's needs with the consumer's actions.
I want to leave the listener with a thought to mull over. We talked about the spending drop billions of dollars potentially shifting away from grocery stores if this scales up. If these drugs change what we buy, less sugar, less processed junk, how will the food industry respond?
That is the billion-dollar question. If the whale customers, the ones buying the high-margin, ultra-processed snacks, start disappearing or cutting their consumption by 30%, big food is going to feel it. They operate on volume.
Will supermarkets look different in 10 years? Will the cereal aisle shrink? Will the protein aisle expand?
Or will the industry reformulate? Will we see Ozempic-friendly, ultra-processed foods that are high protein and low volume? The market always reacts to the consumer. If the consumer biology changes, the market will have to evolve to survive. We might see a whole new category of nutrient-dense convenience foods emerging.
A fascinating future to think about. And here's a challenge for you, the listener. You don't need a prescription to do this. Look at your own receipts for the last week. Just take a glance. Regardless of medication, calculate your own ratio. How much of your cart was unprocessed versus ultra-processed?
It is a revealing exercise. You might be surprised at what the truth serum of your own receipt tells you.
Indeed. We hope this deep dive gave you some food for thought pun intended on how biology, economy, and nutrition all collide in the humble grocery cart. Thanks for listening, and we will see you on the next deep dive.
Stay curious.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.